Great. So I am so glad to welcome you all to our Artist Talk with Ben Haggard. I am going to very briefly introduce Ben, and then I will turn it over to him to give his talk and show some images, and then we can do questions and discussion at the end. So without further ado, let me introduce quickly Ben.
Il va parler, on va l'entendre.
Ben Haggard's first visit to the Leo Marchutz School was in the summer of 1978 and was, in his own words, life-changing. Ben discovered that he was a visual thinker and that painting was a language that allowed him to express and evolve his understanding of the world. These insights were corroborated when he returned for the winter program in 1980, redirecting him from what he had assumed would be an academic career into a life as an artist and designer. Ben's public life is focused on ecological design, including nearly 3 decades as part of Regenesis, a group that has helped to pioneer the practice and theory of regenerative design and development. In parallel, he has privately pursued a practice of painting with occasional forays into ceramics and sculpture. He has exhibited during that time, most notably a show at Site Santa Fe, but exhibiting has not been his priority. Ben is now transitioning to a full-time focus as an artist. In his own words, he is interested in painting and drawing as a way of exploring how one experiences phenomena before the rational mind kicks in and turns visual impressions into concepts and language. He thinks of his work as research into what it means to see.
Très bien.
So, with that, I will turn things over to Ben.
Hi, everyone. Wonderful to see you. Good. That was a very nice summary of kind of what I was going to start with, which was sort of a brief personal history around me and painting. One of the things that has been true for me for all of these years that I have been painting and drawing actively is that I've had to do it in my spare time. I've had a full-time career going on as a design consultant and teacher. And so I've been working on the side, and it's been interesting because I'm very prolific, it turns out. And so it hasn't actually slowed me down. And there's been something about the compression around not having unlimited time to do what I'm doing that's helped me stay focused and productive. And the other thing that was a side effect of that is I realized very quickly that I couldn't focus on having a career as an artist. I couldn't sell art or do a lot of exhibiting and also produce works of art, that I had to make a choice. And that's turned out to be a good choice for me, that it actually makes a lot more sense for me to focus on just doing the painting. And recognizing that is what caused me to shift my orientation or emphasis and say that, well, what I'm really doing here is research. The work ends up being kind of private. I don't share it much with anyone. But it is a continuous process of learning, for me, learning how to see. And but that begs another question, which is, that's fine to be learning how to see, but am I also honing my ability to express what I'm seeing? Am I getting better as a painter? So those are all of the things that have been there over these years, as I've been kind of having two lives simultaneously. And now, as Rose mentioned, at the end of this next year, I'm going to be I'm leaving my career as a design consultant, and I'll be focusing entirely on my work as an artist and sort of being in the world as an artist. But that raises interesting questions for me that have to do with the intersection or the overlap between this work that I've been doing on the topic of regeneration, which is a kind of living systems principle, and my work as an artist. How have they all of these years been informing one another, and how do I make that more conscious and explicit for myself and continue to pursue my work as an artist as an act of regenerative development. That probably sounds a little bit esoteric, and maybe we can open that up as we get further into the conversation. One or two other things that I want to say about that, and then I'll share a few images with you, and then talk a little bit about where I'm headed next, what I'm thinking about working on next. But this question of the overlap between being an artist and working in the world regeneratively is important to me, because my sense is that the key to dealing with the changes that are happening in the world at the moment, particularly at a kind of global and ecological scale, the bumping up against the planet's limits with regard to being able to sustain life, is, I suppose, the most compelling or superordinate issue we're facing as a species. And I believe that the way to deal with it is not by responding directly to it or by trying to find technical solutions, but by changing who we are, changing how we think, changing how we relate to one another and to the planet. And that's what I mean by regenerative work. It has to do with going deeply into what it is to be a human being in a socio and ecological context, and how do we do a better job of fulfilling our role as a species within the family of life. So I believe that artists, and particularly this school of artists, the one that came out of the Leo Marchutz school, have something to offer in that regard. I believe that this idea of an education in seeing, really learning an education in vision, is part of what I mean when I say thinking differently, approaching the world differently, relating to it differently. At least it's where I learned to do many of the things that I ended up applying in my work. For me, it hasn't always been conscious, but I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Leo and Sam and Billy and John and Alan, in terms of giving me a way to cultivate the inner discipline that allows me to see the world differently, which I think is a big part of what at least this lineage of painters has to offer. So that's kind of my opening statement, kind of where I'm at and what I'm thinking about. I'll share with you some images. I had to do this in a hurry for Rose because she needed to post it. And my work is I'm not well organized. And so I went and kind of randomly grabbed a few images. They don't necessarily represent anything coherent. It's just what I could put my hands on quickly. But it is a mix of images, and it's a tiny cross-section. In these years, I don't know, I have many thousands and thousands of paintings and drawings and gouache and oil pastels and all the rest of it piled up in a storage area. I think many of you can relate. And so this is a pretty random sampling, but I'll share it with you, maybe say a word or two about each image. And then after that, I'd like to share some of the questions I'm thinking about as I move into focusing more of my time and attention on this, and open it up for any conversation that you'd like to have. So let me put these up. Oh, hang on. Okay, that's showing up, I assume?
Yep, that looks great.
Great. Okay. So first, I have a few drawings. These are all lithocrayon on ordinary paper. And I'll just run through they give you, this one is obviously a building. Oh, come on now. Uh-oh. Okay, I can change that way. A landscape. Another landscape. Portrait. And another portrait, although you could also think of this as a still life. So that's pretty typical of what I've been working on: portraits, landscapes, still lifes of various sorts. Then this next group, these were done along the coast of Great Britain. These are oil pastel on paper. These are, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago. I've turned to oil pastel a lot over the years because it's an extremely mobile, packable medium. So I can just throw it in my suitcase, and I travel all over the world. And so this lets me take an hour out and go do some drawing or painting wherever I am. These next few images are portraits. Now, these are larger format. This one is maybe 3 by 4 feet. And these are oil on canvas. Okay, and then this next group are, you could say, landscapes. Again, oil on canvas. This one also is quite large format. I'll pause here for a second. There's one of the things that each of these paintings represents is me trying to take the spontaneity of what I'm doing when I'm working small format with oil pastel on paper and translate it onto the canvas. So in this case, I was in all of these, I was working directly before the motif, but I'm trying to get the same kind of urgency and stroke and sort of separation of the color to show up on canvas that I was getting in the oil pastels. And you'll see a really different kind of experimentation a little bit later, where I'm also trying to translate from oil pastel to canvas, but in that case, I'm working from the images of the oil pastels directly rather than from the motif. The other thing to say about this is this was a period when I was very much under the spell of the de Kooning, the big de Kooning exhibit that was at MoMA some years ago. And there was something about the way he was dissolving the boundaries of things. The way I was interpreting is he was creating a kind of through line, you know, in the images that would touch down, but there was like you could feel the motion through the gesture. And so I was trying here to do that same thing. It's like there's a larger motion that sort of interacts with the canvas and then moves on. I don't know how successful that is, but it was something I was really preoccupied with. And it's interesting to me to learn later that Billy also had gotten sort of swept up in trying to, I don't know, integrate or understand de Kooning as an influence. Okay, so this next little group transitioned to something a little different. This is one of the oil pastels on paper, again, a landscape. And you still see that sense of kind of motion and sort of like letting the mark grab or be a part of a larger motion and the sense of motion in the image. This is, sort of conventional landscape, with a horizon line. The next couple grew out of something that John Gasbrak stimulated me to be interested in. We were talking about Monet in preparation for a visit to Giverny, and he said, we were talking about abstraction in Monet and his move toward abstraction. And John said, it's really interesting that as his horizon line moved up, in other words, as his point of view moved down toward, in his case, the surface of water, the paintings became increasingly free and abstract. And I had been searching for something like that. I was interested in how to make what I was doing less a slave or of nature, right, of what I was seeing. And so I wanted to continue working from what I was seeing in a direct way, but not be quite so such a slave to appearances. And so for me, this idea of moving my viewpoint down to a horizontal surface gave me permission to do a lot of exploration. So this is just a little bit of lawn with a paved surface next to it. This is looking at a body of water, pond. You can see the reflection of trees in it. So I've spent many years now doing image after image after image of just looking at the light and reflection and colors and motion on the water and trying to render it, but also allow it to free me up, allow me to see things differently. Oh, there's another one of these. So they're very abstract, but they're abstract paintings that are anchored in what I'm in my actual visual experience. So it's a way around just trying to make things up myself. I've experimented with painting abstractly, just kind of in a vacuum, and it doesn't work very well. It's not natural to me. I'm much more, there's a lot more going on in terms of the organization of the drawing, the color, the light, and so on, when I'm actually looking at something. So I've gotten really interested in empty or even boring visual fields. What does it look like to look at a white wall or a plain wall? What does it look like to look down at a piece of concrete? What's the experience of seeing that, and can I render it as an image? Okay, there's one more little group of images here. These are oil paintings that are me trying to translate or render the original oil pastel. So this is another thing that I've never done very much. I've never worked from my own drawings or my own, smaller paintings to create a larger painting. If I do a small sketch and a large painting, I do them both in front of the motif. So this was also an experiment to see what it takes to gather something from my environment and then work from the image and see if I can extend it. This is a landscape looking across a small lake to a red bridge and the tree line on the far bank. This is one of the images looking at the water and light on water. One of the things that's interesting about these is, although they're really abstract and maybe a little hard to read, you can still pick up the aerial perspective because the bottom of the painting is closer to me and the top is further away. So you can get a sense of distance and the reflected light off of the upper right corner and so on.
Are these big, Ben? Are these large paintings?
Yeah, this one, for example, again, it's probably 3 feet by 4 feet approximately. Most of these are in that general area. I've been working even beyond that size, but not always very successfully. This is the only image in here that's in acrylic. For a long time, I was trying to work in acrylic, not very successfully. This one I always liked, but still, it's a different animal. I never got very good at it. And then this last one is kind of a joke, which is a friend of mine used Photoshop to actually place that painting we just looked at in a gallery setting. This is a gallery owned by some friends of mine here in Santa Fe. And you can sort of see other images in the background, but this gives you a little bit of a sense of the scale, you know, what their size is and what the impact is in a space. And that's it for images.
Thank you,
Okay.
Ben. That's so lovely.
Yeah, so let me just say a couple more words about, you know, what I'm currently ruminating on, what I'm interested in pursuing further. And then we'll open it up for a conversation. So I've got these kind of two things that I'm trying to pay attention to. It's a little bit like the thing that Leo always taught is you can think about the paintings all you want when you're not painting them, but when you're painting, you have to stop thinking. You have to just be there, be in it, be immersed in the experience and allow it to be translated through through your body and through the training that you have. And so in a way, what I want to do is become a better painter. And so I want to keep painting and keep using the questions that I ask and the questions that other people ask me to hone and refine my ability to paint. But at the same time, I'm trying to place the activity of painting and what I'm creating in a context where it has meaning in the world. Not in terms of me being an important painter, but how I am changing myself and how I am learning, enabling me to have more of a beneficial impact in the community that I'm part of and so on. So that's kind of the shape of the questions that I'm holding. And one of them Rose already mentioned in her introduction, which is I'm really interested in this idea of phenomenology and being able to experience a phenomena, being, for example, visual phenomena without interpreting them. And I've been asked by my godson, who lives next door, who's homeschooled, if I will teach him painting. He's 13. One of the more terrifying requests that's ever been made to me. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I get him to actually experience phenomena without interpreting or judging it, you know, without calling it a name? Oh, that's a tree, that's a nose. And then how do I translate that for myself back into the practice of painting? That's one of the things I'm thinking a lot about. Second thing I'm thinking a lot about is what is the relationship between a painter and his or her community? And what is the community service that painting represents? Especially if you're like me and you're not really exhibiting. And so how do I, and why am I doing this work? What is it really about? And I think the short answer, and probably a kind of superficial answer, is what I alluded to earlier, that teaching people to see, whether or not they want to be painters with the seeing, teaching people to see, helping them learn how to see, is fundamental to changing the way we inhabit our places. So I think that whether that translates into me doing more teaching or finding ways to do community events or what it is, I don't know. But I think that is a responsibility that I have, is to find ways to help other people see differently. I'm obviously interested in this lineage. I've been part of various efforts to secure or catalog or promote Leo's work and, the painters around Leo. And that interests me very much. I wish that I were a better exemplar of that lineage. That's why I keep saying I want to be a better painter. But I've really been fed by it and really would like to see it endure in some way through what gets passed through each of us, on to the people around us, the people we share our work with or that we teach. And then I have a couple of other oddball interests. One of them has to do with how do I translate living systems theory, which I've been immersed in for years, have co-written many books around. How do I translate that into how I speak about and think about painting, right? Is there something that could feed the conversation that we're all part of around art and painting that could come out of that other discipline? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm really interested in it. I actually have an ambition to write about it at some point. And then the last one is a conversation I had with Sam not long ago. It's like, okay, yeah, I've got thousands of paintings and stacked up notebooks and whatever. What do you do with them? What, after you die, do you just sort of haul them out and burn them? How do we think about, okay, so if we have the humility to recognize that this was my own developmental process and my own research, what do you do with the results of that, right? If there is no obvious market or value for that in the world. And this is a question that I can't answer alone. I think it's a collective question. I believe in the value of what we're doing as a community. I think that we've, sometimes against vicissitudes and sometimes against our own, resistances, we've had to push and work hard to keep going with this work. And so even just for that reason, it has value. So I kind of plant that in as a seed that, for a collective conversation, not necessarily today, please, but at some point we need to keep thinking about it. Okay, that's me doing my shtick. I'd love to open it up for comments, questions, thoughts, anything.
Thank you so much, Ben. So great to hear about your process and what you're thinking moving forward. Does anyone want to start us off with a question or a comment? You'll just have to, you can sort of raise your hand like this, or you can just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Actually, why don't I start? Ben, you were just talking about how you've written about living systems theory and you want to write more about it in relation to art. Could you speak more about what living systems theory is and how you plan to explore that, or how you hope to explore that?
Sure. I'll do it by using one relatively simple example. So one of the things that distinguishes living systems theory from other kinds of systems theory or other kind of scientific practices is that it is a science of wholes, right? Something that's whole. And we're deeply embedded in, deeply conditioned to fragment the world in order to understand it, right? We break a problem down into its component parts. We describe things in terms of their various elements. We basically think of breaking things down and then adding them back together in order to understand a whole, right? And but the wholeness of things doesn't lie in their fragmentation, right? It lies in their inherent wholeness, right? And this is all happening in human perception. I mean, out there, they're whole. They don't need us to understand that they're whole to be whole, right? It's a problem in here. And it's partly a cultural problem. So how do we learn to experience something not as a list of attributes, but just as it is? Unbroken, undifferentiated whole, right? Well, in my mind, that's how we're approaching the motif, ideally. Easier said than done, but that's what we're trying to do, is simply experience it as whole, not breaking it into, okay, I got to get that little dark tree over there in it because there's a dark tree over there. But, you know, this is this is whole and I am whole and we're encountering one another. So that's an example that when I approach a motif that way, I'm approaching it as a living system, as a living being. Yeah. And through painting, I'm making that fundamental to the way I experience the world, right? It goes beyond habit. It's just simply, it's like a discipline. I don't have to work at it or think about it. A lot of people have to work and think at it to be able to access simply encountering something as whole. That help to illustrate?
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. Reminds me of, Alan, your robot and the rose metaphor. Other questions, comments for Ben? Yeah, Ken, go ahead. You'll just have to unmute yourself.
All right. Thanks, Ben. How does your approach then, when what you just described, translate, you know, the way you see and this idea of wholeness as you approach the motif? How do you translate that into marks on the surface? You know, what's the physical component of your sort of philosophical approach?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm gonna have to sneak up on that question a little bit. One of the things I remember, this probably was Sam was teaching forever ago, was that by the time you've got 3 marks on the canvas, you should have constituted a whole, right? So there's a sense in which you're trying to see, you know, what are the things that start to establish the whole of the space, the whole of what I'm experiencing? And then you just keep building and building until it's a fully constituted whole. And that's always a hard moment, is to not go over that, right? Not go beyond its ability to breathe, right? So that's sort of that's still from theory. That's what I learned, right? And what I try and practice. What I find is that I'm not all that good at it. And I had a really interesting recent encounter. I was in Aix a couple months ago, and I spent a few hours with Francois, and he was looking at images with me. And he was looking at a bunch of the portraits. He was intrigued by something was bothering him about the portraits, and he just kept looking at them and looking at them. And he said, "Oh," he said, "you're really interested in the eyes. He's this area here." He said, "but you're also really interested in this." And he said, "So you've got 2 points of view going on in each of these, and it ends up creating a kind of caricature." Right? Unconsciously, because I've allowed my focal point and my interest to drift, I've shattered kind of the wholeness of the painting. And I realized I do that a lot, especially if I'm working in a vertical format. And so I've been experimenting with not making that conscious, recognizing that this is something that I could work on and work with. And I spent a few weeks out in Berlin, where I live part-time, just in the parks, drawing trees, which have always been hard for me. Trees kind of are hard to get my head around, so I keep going back to them. And I realized, oh, I do the same thing with trees. I can't make a choice between the trunk and the overstory, right? And so I do some trunk and I do some overstory, and I'm sort of like mixing and matching. This is all happening unconsciously. So I thought, okay, what happens if I look at that tree over there only from the point of view of the branches and the leaves, and allow that to focus my attention and work out from there, but always stay focused there. And it was surprising what began to shift in the way I was approaching it, that I hadn't realized how much interpretation I was doing of, well, it's not a tree if you haven't put, the little stick at the bottom and the little ball on top together in the picture. I don't know if this answers your question, but it's like, I think the way I deal with these things is I find out what the next problem is, right, that I need to work on. And then the next one after that. Thanks.
Pauline,
Yeah.
go ahead. You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Ben. Thank you. I've been thinking, looking at some of your pastels and other painting, and you mentioned a lot wholeness and preserve it and recreate it. So I wanted to ask you about light and the role of light in a painting, and literal light as a unifying element, and how you go about, preserving it, creating it through your colors and value.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because there's of course the light of the painting, the organization of the light, and then there's the light, right? The light that's showing up in nature. And the lighting, I think Billy used to talk about it. And I'm super attracted to reflected light and surface light. That's one of the reasons why working with the water is appealing to me. And you always see the kind of, where is the sun being reflected on the water and so on. I can't help it. I'm attracted to lighting. So the trick is to let that be part of the subject matter, but not distract from the underlying light of the whole surface. And again, I have no idea how well I do with that. We could pull up maybe an image and try and look at it. I'm not sure I'm well equipped to be my own critic. I'll pull this one up. Did that work? Let's see.
Yes, we can see it now.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, obviously you can see the reflected light in the ground surface, right? The road or path or whatever that is, and then the light in the sky and so on. But in terms of the other thing that I do a lot of with these oil pastels, and I think this has shown up a lot in the oil paints too, is I use a lot of really light colors like white and pale grays and pale yellows and things to sort of create the relationships between the different surfaces in terms of them all being one light. I don't know if that's visible. If you look closely here, you can see how that hard red line on the left-hand side gets broken up by sort of white being scumbled over the top of it, to show that that it's not a hard edge, right? And even though it's not literally there, there's a kind of red reflected in the sky because of the red that's over here in my experience. And I'm doing the same thing down on the ground level. So I don't know that I'm getting at your question. So you're asking kind of about it technically. And the truth is, I don't always know what I'm doing technically. I know I'm always trying to find other ways to get at what I'm seeing. And one of the things that having the sense of wholeness is that I really try not to have separate objects, right? It's a weave, right? And that relates to how all of the different strokes are sort of interacting together. Yeah, I'd say I get lucky once in a while, right? It doesn't always work. Pauline, is that?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just checking back with Pauline about, does that?
Yes, I was happy to look at the painting, and that's what I was interested in the use of colors in relationship to value that creates the light of the whole painting, and how does it relate, to the motif? Because before you mentioned the role of a tree is having to be connected to, the top to the bottom, and in my experience, it also has a lot to do with the light and how does one pursue the unity of the light
Yeah.
in what we see and translate it in a new way. I mean, in a original.
Yeah. Well, or value, you could say. I mean, the painting's being or drawing is being organized by values, and values are, again, experientially, they're superordinate to things, right? That when we're seeing something, we're seeing a bunch of relationships of value and, of course, of colors. And if we can capture that, the underlying thing that we're experiencing is sort of there, but that's not really the point. No.
Thank you.
Ben, I was curious, you mentioned that you tried doing some acrylics at one point, but you sort of, abandoned that, or maybe not abandoned it, but didn't prefer using acrylics versus oils, and other media. Can you talk more about why acrylics didn't work so well for you?
Yeah, I can try. So acrylic, I started working with acrylic, one, because it's cheap. I was doing this massive portrait project. I painted, I don't know, 1,500 portraits in a period of 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
It was kind of a social networking project. I would paint somebody, and then they would bring their cousin or their next door neighbor, and I'd paint them, and then they'd bring someone. So it was a way of kind of reaching
Wow.
across the community and inviting them. It's that community dimension I was talking about. So it was a way of inviting people into the painting process, the experience of being painted for a portrait and being in a painter's studio and blah, blah, blah. And it was fun. It kind of knit together all of these people. And within 2 or 3 waves, I was well beyond people I had ever met or heard of before.
Wow.
So it did start
great.
to reach and touch every different aspect of the community. So that was what I was doing, but it was incredibly expensive, time-consuming project. And I needed to be able to work with cheap materials that I could work with fast, that would dry fast and get. And so I went deep into acrylic to do that. And it was, the quality of the paintings and the color and so on wasn't my primary focus. It was more on just the activity of engaging people in this exchange.
Sure.
But I came out of it feeling really dissatisfied. I just never liked the color. It tends to be a bit flat and opaque. It doesn't have the kind of luminescence that the oil paint just naturally does. And so I decided to go back and try and get better at it. And the thing is, it's a technical medium. It's chemical, technical thing. And there are all kinds of things you can do to build luminosity into the paint and get the different levels of transparency and blah, 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 blah. I just don't have that. I'm not a technically oriented person. For me, painting's immediate. It's fun. It's what I want to do. And I don't want to spend time trying to get the right mix of various underlying media to get the paint to do what I'm hoping it will do. I'd rather the paint just do what it's going to do. So I'm happier, both the oil pastels and the oil paint have it just innate.
Right.
So it's interesting, I went from when I first started out, I was mostly working in watercolor, which again has this kind of transparency and vibrancy. And then because I wanted to get a different kind of result, I moved almost entirely over to gouache, and I spent, I don't know, 10 years painting in gouache. It was the same problem to get gouache to be brilliant and vibrant and have the same qualities of transparency and so on. Took a lot of effort, but that wasn't about the paint. That was about me painting. It was about using paint. So that was a fun exploration. This, by the way, this is a little side note that I shared with you. I shared with you a link to a website where people can go and look at images, but be aware that all of the images on that website are work on paper.
Okay.
I hadn't started photographing any of the stuff on canvas, but it includes some of the gouache and some of the other things. So if you're interested in seeing the work on paper, there's a little cross section there.
Great. And I'll send that out too in my follow-up notes after this call too, so everyone can look at that. Thank you, Ben. Other questions, comments for Ben? Alan, go ahead.
Ben, I'm really interested in the evolution from those big earlier, the large paintings, that sort of bigger, larger paintings, to your more recent larger paintings, because I find a big difference between those two things. I'm just wondering if you have that sensation as well. And I'm trying to articulate sort of what I'm feeling, but do you feel like there's some kind of evolution between, say, the one that we just looked at and that last one that you showed us? Because I'm thinking about how you were talking, and you talk a lot about the process of seeing and how that affects you, and how you're also trying to give to the world what the process of seeing is actually like, if that makes sense. And I feel that in the earlier paintings, the strokes are very related to your feeling in terms of how you're being astonished by what you're seeing. And when I get to that last painting, it seems much more about the painting itself in terms of how all of the strokes are. That it's less, that the last painting is much more about the painting, and the earlier ones are much more about the process of painting.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I think it's one of several problems I've set for myself. So when I'm painting in front of the motif, it's less mediated. It's less hard to engage with the actual seeing of the motif. And again, this was partly stimulated by that visit we all made to Giverny, where I realized how much of Monet's work was done in his studio. I mean, it looks on the surface like Monet is always in front of the motif, right? But it turns out that's not true, especially with the really big water lilies. And I thought, well, I've never developed the ability to work from my own sketches inside the studio. Can I learn how to do that? And so it's been this extended exploration of how do I take these very vivid oil pastels from the motif and rework them as a painting in the studio. And it turns out I'm terrible at it. Or I'm learning about it. That's probably better. And the first thing I started doing, which I should have known better, but the first thing I started doing was literally trying to copy them. oh, get all the color and this kind of line and that kind of line. And the first of those, that late series of oil paintings is an example of that. It's okay. I have it up on the wall. I enjoy it. But, and then I realized that's not working. So I needed to figure out how to render it. Could I see again what I was seeing in the drawing and bring it to life in the painting? And I'm in the middle of that. And I may get somewhere with it, and it's more likely I won't. And I'll have to go back to the motif. So that's one of the big differences that you're experiencing. The other thing, and this can be true whether I'm in front of the motif or not. This again was one of Francois's observations. He was looking at a bunch of the landscapes, the drawings, and he said, "Oh," he said, "You're really attached to the gesture, aren't you?" Or he said it in one of those very polite Francois ways, right? He was observing how noticeable how the gesture jumps off the page, and he said, "Where's the sacrifice here?" Right? Referring to that thing about it can't be too much nature, but it also can't be too much of the artist, right? There's a right balance between the two. And I think that what you're echoing, Alan, is what he was saying, that in that last painting, you're seeing too much of the artist and not enough of nature, right? I mean, we can get trapped in either. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying, but can we look at the last painting? I mean, I
Sure.
find, yeah.
Let me pull it up. Did that show up? No, sorry. This one?
Yeah, is that the last? Yeah. Was that the last one you showed? I think that is.
Yeah, it was the last one. I showed it then photoshopped into a setting, but
Right.
same one.
So I find I'm just saying, when I look at this painting, I'm much more into the painting itself, and the strokes and the way that you're using the strokes have actually become subservient to the painting, which I really like. That's what I'm not. And that in the earlier ones, there's three things going on in the early ones. There's your emotion that seems to be coming through the strokes, and there's the motif that you're in love with, and then there's the painting that you're trying to make. There's three things going on there, and I find something about what's happening here to be a combination of those things, so that the painting itself becomes more of a thing unto itself, not related to your emotion or the motif or the fact that you're trying to make a painting. It becomes more one thing in terms where that emotion that you're expressing in the way that you do the strokes seems tied a little more to the painting itself. But that's just what I'm feeling right now.
That's interesting.
I mean, because the thing that really excites me in the earlier paintings is much more that excitement and that astonishment that I'm sensing that you're seeing as I look at the painting. I'm much more feeling that I'm hearing you seeing, when you're looking at whatever it is that you're looking at, and that your sort of excited strokes are talking more about that process than, the painting itself.
Yeah, interesting.
Here, I don't feel that.
Yeah. Let me back up. Let me back up one image.
Hey, Ben?
Yeah, back up one.
Yeah, or Yeah,
Uh,
go ahead, Paul.
Ben, could I interject
Please,
for a
please do.
second? This is Cole. Yeah, I think what Alan was saying to me, I agree with him because it seems that this last painting, perhaps it's in time the most recent one, maybe.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Pretty close. There's kind of a selflessness about the construction of it. And I don't mean construction in a contrived kind of way, but I mean just in terms of your sense of discovery through a kind of lack of contrivance or separation between those elements that may have been more obviously distinct and differentiated in the earlier work, where you're kind of responding to the horizon, or you're responding to the trees or the growth on a hillside or something. Where in this painting, it just seems to me you're kind of in some sort of fluid concert with the act of painting, and I like the results. It has a unity about it that I feel is far more engaging in some ways than the earlier pieces, where, as Francois, I guess, said, you were more enthralled with your gesture of mark making, where here it seems the marks are quite lyrical and fluid.
Great. It's helpful. I am not in conversation with other painters very much, so it's really incredibly helpful to have other people look and talk about and think about it with me. Thank you both. I know we're just about out of time. Shall I show? Let me just move to the image just before this one, which actually I think I painted after this one. So it's again the same process, starting with a drawing, and then trying to render that drawing in the studio. Now the subject was different. The last one was a lawn, and this is reflections on water. Right?
I think it's possible to be responsive to these last two paintings in a way where you simply, as I see it, I'm able to go with the flow of the relationships that you're finding in the touch of the color and the value, the placement. I feel they have a far more compelling kind of unity about them, which is also maybe this living systems thing you were alluding to earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
That's my 2 cents.
Great. Thank you.
There's also a sensation, Ben, I think, you'll have to see where you go with these things, but there is a sensation in the painting that it is coming from a visual place, okay, that it's not conceptually, it's not overly conceptual in terms of what we're seeing here. And I'm when you say one's from water and what was the other one? The other one?
Grass, lawn.
When I look at these paintings, I'm not really that I don't really care what they're from. There's a difference. Okay. There's something happening about the way they're put together where, the motif and your expression and how you're putting it on the canvas all become one thing that makes it become something other than any one of those three things. Sense.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
in a way, I think you guys are articulating what drew me to this. It's kept me completely absorbed and fascinated for a couple of years now, but also not confident that it was working. You know, feeling a little bit out at sea. So it's interesting to actually have people look at them with me. It's great. Okay, I'm going to take that down.
Mhm. Any last questions or comments for Ben before we wrap things up today? Oh, well, thank you so much, Ben, for spending the hour talking to us about your work and answering all our questions and going so deep into your practice. It's been so wonderful to hear about it all, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you go next now that you're going to be full-time focused on your painting. I'm so looking forward to that.
Great. Well, thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me. Thanks everyone for showing
Bye,
up.
Ben.
Thanks,
Take
Ben.
care.
Thank you, Ben.
Hey,
See you.
Rose,
Thank you so
Rose,
much.
you stay on a few
Thank-
minutes, Rose, with me?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop the
Hi,
recording.